Hi, I'm Jim Rollins, Regional Sales Representative for Mauget Company. Today I would like to talk to you about using Mauget microinjection in a plant healthcare program. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mauget. Mauget actually introduced microinjection technology back in 1958. They were the first company to inject plant healthcare products into trees. Mauget at this point in time has a very broad product line, including insecticides, fungicides, an antibiotic, micronutrients, and fertilizers. There are several ways that you can apply plant healthcare products to your trees, but I think Mauget microinjection has distinctive advantages. Number one, when using Mauget microinjection, you have no drift or off-target chemical exposure concerns. I know a lot of people that treat trees tell me that they really can't spray a large tree in an urban environment because they have concerns about the product drifting into adjacent properties. You can treat a tree with Mauget with full confidence it's not going to drift into an adjacent area. There's no water contamination concerns with Mauget microinjection. Oftentimes, your client's trees may be in close proximity to a body of water, a swimming pool, or maybe an area where you have a high water table. You can treat those trees with Mauget products and be very sure that the product is not going to end up in the water supply. Mauget microinjection is a closed chemical application system. The product is either in the capsule, the feeder tube, or the tree. And the advantage to you as an applicator is that your exposure to the chemical is greatly reduced as compared to other techniques of applying chemicals to trees. All the Mauget products are systemic, which means the active ingredient is inside the tree. In the overwhelming majority of the time, that's exactly where you want the product, is inside the tree, where it's addressing the problems the tree is having. Mauget microinjection is a very efficient and targeted way of applying chemicals to trees. Very close to 100% of the product goes to the intended source. With other techniques of applying chemicals to trees, you oftentimes have to overcompensate the amount of product you're applying to account for the fact that some of that product's going to drift, or it's going to drip, or it's going to evaporate, or it's going to go someplace where it's really not of any benefit. The Mauget microinjection system is a passive, low-pressure microinjection system. The benefit of that is that it minimizes a danger to the tree. Some other systems that operate on a much higher pressure, you can end up with bark separation or bark splitting or maybe some other type of damage to the tree. With Mauget microinjection, there's no rain fast or wash-off concerns. If it rains immediately after you've applied your chemical, it's not going to cause any problems. With Mauget microinjection, there's no expensive technical equipment requirements. You don't need to invest a lot of money in new equipment. You don't need a dedicated truck or a dedicated trailer. So it's an easy service to add to the services you're already providing for your clients. Mauget microinjection is a very profitable service for you to provide for your customers. I know I talk to a lot of people in the tree care, lawn care, and the maintenance business, and one of the frustrations they have is that it's very competitive, so it's very difficult for them to get a reasonable profit for the services they provide. I think you'll find with Mauget microinjection, it is somewhat of a specialized service, and you can get a reasonable profit for the Mauget microinjection. And last of all, but certainly not least of all, with Mauget, you're going to get effective results. You can use Mauget on your client's trees with the full confidence that the results are going to be good. I think in understanding how to do Mauget microinjection, it's important that you have a basic tree physiology understanding. When it comes to the tree and Mauget, the main part of the tree that we're interested in is the xylem. And that's because the xylem is the part of the tree that takes the moisture and the nutrients from the soil, translocates it upward throughout the entire tree. And we just take advantage of the fact that the tree has such a thorough system. This represents the cross-section of a tree. As you go from the outside inside, you have the outer bark, the inner bark, the phloem, the cambium, and the xylem. And the xylem is actually where we want to inject the chemical with Mauget microinjection. And it is generally the outer 3 growth rings of a tree, because that's where most of the transpiration occurs, in those outer 3 growth rings. And that is usually about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch deep in the tree. Wounding and compartmentalization. It's not unusual when you're talking to a client and you're explaining to them what you're going to do to that tree. They'll say, well, wait a minute, if you're going to drill a hole in my tree, isn't that going to cause a problem? Isn't that going to damage the tree? And drilling a hole in a tree does cause some short-term wounding. But the analogy I like to use, it's not unlike a proper pruning job in that the short-term injury you might cause to the tree, the long-term advantages far outweigh. This is a picture of an ornamental pear tree. It had been treated with Mauget microinjection each year for approximately 10 years. Eventually, the tree outgrew the landscape and it was cut down. And it was cut down about 1.5 inches above the soil level, about the same area where they were doing the microinjections. And the point that I want to make on this slide is you can see the wounding and the compartmentalization. Those light-colored spots you see are the compartmentalization on the wounds of the injections that were done 3 or 4 years prior to when this tree was cut down. And the point that I want to make with this slide is I don't see anything in this slide that gives me any great concern in terms of long-term injury or damage to the tree. I don't see holes in the tree that could create some structural problems, and I don't see rotting wood or abscesses which could create some problems. If you look at this picture, the tree has done a very effective job of compartmentalizing and putting good, healthy growth tissue where the injection occurred a few years ago. I would now like to spend a few minutes talking about the Mauget microinjection procedure. You heard me say earlier that you don't need to spend money on a lot of expensive equipment to do Mauget microinjection. Well, these are the tools that you'll need to do Mauget microinjection. You'll need the Mauget capsules. You'll need a cordless electric drill. You'll need an 11/64" drill bit. You'll need to have either a tape measure or a diameter tape. And you'll need your personal protective equipment. Your personal protective equipment will be a pair of chemical-resistant gloves, either goggles or a face shield, long sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes, and socks. There are some circumstances where it's not particularly advisable to be injecting trees. One of those situations would be a low soil moisture, when the soil is extremely dry. If you have extremely dry soil types and you want to treat the trees, it's always a good idea to advise your client to irrigate the soil under the tree both before and after you're doing your injections. This will do 2 things. Number 1 is the moisture will increase the transpiration rate and you'll get better uptake, and it'll improve the chemical uptake as it moves through the tree. It's also not advisable to inject trees during cold weather. It's always advisable to make microinjections when the soil temperatures are above 44 degrees. We find that when the soil temperatures are below 44 degrees, the tree generally goes into its winter dormancy, and it's difficult to get the product to uptake. We know that once the soil temperature gets above 44 degrees, that's when the sap flow begins to increase. Dosage, the number of capsules that you will need. You can actually calculate the dosage by taking the circumference of the tree, breast height, in inches, and divide that by 6, and that will determine the number of capsules you will need for a tree that size. So if your tree has a 30-inch circumference, it would take 5 capsules. You can also calculate the dosage based on the diameter of the tree. You take the diameter in inches, divide that by 2, and that will determine the number of capsules you will need. So a tree that has a 10-inch diameter would need 5 capsules. Dosage. What volume capsule should I use? Some of the Mauget products come in different volume capsules. You would use the 2 ml volume capsule for what we call small trees. That would be trees that are 2 to 10 inches in diameter. We recommend using the 3 ml capsule for what we consider to be a medium-sized tree. That is a tree that's from 10 to 36 inches in diameter. And we recommend using a 4 ml capsule for what we call large trees. That would be trees that are larger than 36 inches in diameter and above. We recommend that you do not inject trees smaller than 2 inches in diameter. So you begin by measuring the tree to determine the number of capsules you will need for that tree. Where to inject? It's best to inject around the base of the tree as close to the ground as possible. Inject all roots on the top of the buttress where the sap flow is the greatest. That's where you'll get the best uptake because you have a very active sap stream in that area. Where to inject? Stay out of the valleys between the buttress roots where the sap flow is least. You don't have a real active sap stream there, so your uptake is going to be much slower. Avoid injecting in the same area as the previous year's injection, and inject 1 to 2 inches to either the left or the right of a previous year's injection. Next, you want to push the capsule lid down, and what that does is that actually puts some pressure in the capsule. It puts about 6 to 8 pounds pressure in the capsule. Then you want to push the feeder tube part way into the capsule. You want to make sure that the V-notch is on top. Then you want to drill your hole. You want to drill your hole at a slight downward angle. That way, all of the chemical will leave the capsule and enter into the feeder tube. And you want to drill approximately 1/2 to 3/4 inch deep into the tree. The drill bit. We recommend that you use a clean, sharp drill bit. And we actually recommend using what is called a high helix drill bit. It is a woodworker's drill bit. It'll cut a nice clean hole and will get better uptake and will get a better wound response if you use a clean, sharp drill bit. You want to drill through the bark, the phloem, the cambium, and into the active xylem. I think what you'll find is when you're drilling into the tree, the outer bark and the inner bark is fairly soft wood tissue, and your drill bit will actually penetrate that very quickly. Once you hit the xylem of the tree, that is a harder wood tissue, and you'll notice a little more resistance on that drill bit. Usually, once you realize I'm in the xylem, you've probably reached the proper depth, and then it's time just to pull your drill bit out. I always recommend when you pull your drill bit out, after drilling a hole, to look at the sawdust on your drill bit. Ideally, what you want to see is you want to see some light colored wood tissue indicating that you have penetrated the xylem of the tree. If you pull that drill bit out and see nothing but dark wood, that could indicate that the bark was much thicker than you thought and you haven't fully penetrated it. Or, if you see dark wood on your drill bit, it could indicate that you've drilled into some decayed wood tissue. Neither of those situations would be a good place to do an injection. It is better to drill a little bit too deep than a little bit too shallow. After you've drilled the hole, you want to put the feeder tube and the capsule into the freshly drilled hole. Then you want to take your rubber mallet and you want to strike the back of the capsule. Now on the back of the capsule there is a little rectangular area which is designed to be the strike area for your rubber mallet. You want to break the capsule membrane and you want to set the feeder tube into the tree. Then you want to look at the feeder tube. Make sure that there is chemical in the feeder tube indicating that the membrane has been punctured. Then you want to leave the capsule in the tree until both the capsule and the feeder tube are empty. How long is that going to take? That could take anywhere from 10 minutes to several hours. And that'll be contingent on the transpiration rate that's occurring in that tree. And the transpiration rate can be affected by humidity. We find that the lower the humidity, generally the faster the transpiration. It is also affected by the temperature. We find that generally the higher the temperature, the faster the transpiration rate. Sunlight. Generally you'll find that transpiration rate is quicker on a sunny day than it is on an overcast day. Air movement. If you have a breeze or air movement, that'll speed up the transpiration rate as well. Soil moisture. You need to have adequate soil moisture. for a good transpiration rate. Leaf surface. You'll find that the more the leaf surface, the faster the transpiration rate. So injecting a tree that's fully leafed out will be quicker than drilling a tree that has not leafed out yet. Tree health. Generally, a healthy tree, the transpiration rate is faster than in a sick tree. And tree species. We know that the transpiration rate varies somewhat between one tree species and another because sometimes their vascular systems are a little bit different. Capsule removal. Remove the empty capsule after it has emptied. And the way we recommend doing it is to remove the empty capsule with one gloved hand and shield with the other gloved hand. Dispose of the capsule. Place the empty capsules and the feeder tubes in a plastic bag. Securely tie the plastic bag closed and then place it in your regular trash. It is always a good idea to disinfect your drill bit between trees. That is especially true when you're injecting trees that you think might have some type of a disease. You don't want to transport a disease from a sick tree to a healthy tree. And the way we recommend disinfecting your drill bit is just to remove any sawdust that's on the drill bit and then spray the drill bit with either Lysol or some type of a generic equivalent. What about the cost and the pricing of a Mauget microinjection? You can price your Mauget injection however you like, but I find when I talk to applicators, there's kind of two ways that they do it. One school of thought is to take the cost of the chemical and charge the client somewhere between 3 and 5 times the cost of the chemical. If you're on the property providing other services, you can charge around 3 times the cost of the chemical. If you're making a special trip to that customer and only injecting a tree or two, then maybe you would charge them about 5 times the cost of the chemical. The other way that I find applicators charge is they'll charge a flat $10 to $12 per capsule for fertilizer and micronutrient injections and $14 to $18 per capsule for insecticide or fungicide injections. If you had an ash tree and you were going to treat that tree with emicide, let's just say it's a 20-inch diameter tree, it would require 10 capsules, and those capsules would cost you on an average about $3.30 per capsule. So you'd have about $33 worth of materials, and you could bill your client somewhere between $100 and $165 for that injection. So that would leave you about $67 to $132 gross profit. I would now like to spend a few minutes talking about the different products that are available through the Mauget microinjection system and talk about where they might fit in a plant healthcare program. I would like to begin by talking about microinjecting nutrients into trees. Sometimes when I tell somebody we're going to inject micronutrients into trees, they'll say, well, why would I need to inject micronutrients into trees? I do a fall or a spring soil injection around the canopy of the tree, or I treat the lawn with granular applications 4 to 6 times during the year. Isn't that an adequate way to treat trees with fertilizer? In many cases it is, but I think there's some circumstances where injecting trees with fertilizer makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you're dealing with a tree where you have a restricted root system and you really just don't have access to those roots to do an injection. Microinjection would make sense in that circumstance. Sometimes you're dealing with a weak or a moderately weak tree, perhaps due to insect damage, disease damage, some type of physical damage to the tree, or maybe drought stress, and you want to get nutrients into that tree as quickly as possible. Microinjection would make sense in that situation. Sometimes you're dealing with a tree that has a damaged root system, and by microinjection you're bypassing the damaged root system and getting nutrients into the tree quickly. Sometimes you have concerns about water contamination. Really, whenever a rapid availability of nutrients are needed, microinjecting into the tree makes sense. Now, Mauget actually makes 2 fertilizer products. The first product is StemX Plus. It is a fertilizer. It has nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients in it. It comes available in a 6 ml capsule, and it also comes available in the liquid loadable bottles. It is a complete general use fertilizer. Stemex Plus is generally used in trees that are displaying some type of stress which might be related to a fertility problem. The next fertilizer product Mauget makes is Vigor 53. It is a 0, 28, 25 analysis, which means there's no nitrogen in Vigor 53. Vigor 53 comes in a 5 and in a 7.5 ml capsule. And people generally use Vigor 53. Number one is when they're concerned about root damage recovery. They want to get micronutrients, they want to get fertilizer into that tree as quickly as possible, and they've got a damaged root system, so you bypass the roots, get the nutrients into the tree as quickly as possible. People also use Vigor 53 where they have concerns about Phytophthora, which is a root rot organism, because they know that sometimes adding nitrogen to that environment can make it worse. And sometimes people use Vigor 53 when they're dealing with an established landscape. The client says, I like the size, the scale of my landscape, but I want to keep my trees healthy. So they'll use Vigor 53. It'll help maintain the health of the tree, but without the nitrogen, it won't push a lot of vegetative growth. Mauget also makes some micronutrient products. We make injectamin with iron and zinc, which are used on trees that have iron and zinc deficiencies. Probably the main trees that we use our injectamin iron zinc on are pin oaks and birch trees. We also make injectamin with manganese. We use that on trees that have a manganese deficiency. And the main trees that we use injectamin manganese on are red maples and sweet gum. When I talk about micronutrient deficiencies, I do like to point out that sometimes that can be a little bit of a misnomer. Because you might think, well, with a micronutrient deficiency, you just don't have the micronutrients into the soil. Oftentimes, that's not the case. Oftentimes, there's an adequate supply of micronutrients in the soil, but the soil has a high pH, which makes those micronutrients insoluble and unavailable for tree uptake. So by adding more micronutrients to that type of a soil really doesn't benefit the tree. By bypassing that high pH soil, we can get the micronutrients into the tree and improve the quality of the tree. This is an example of fertilizing trees with restricted roots. You can see in both of these two pictures, you really don't have a lot of access to the roots of the tree, and it would be difficult to fertilize these trees with a way other than a microinjection. These three pictures are a construction damage recovery. The applicator that treated these trees estimated that that tree lost about 40% of its roots during the final grade of construction, and the tree was beginning to display stress. The tree was treated with Stemex Plus. 3 years later, it looked much better. 20 years later, it was actually a very attractive tree, and it added to the aesthetics of the landscape. This is a picture of a red maple tree. There were actually two trees. They were street trees. They both showed symptoms of a micronutrient deficiency. They were treated with injectamin iron zinc. One tree was treated with injectamin iron zinc, and the other tree was not. And you can see a year later, the tree that was treated, the leaves have a nice, dark green, healthy appearance. The tree that was untreated still displays the signs of the micronutrient deficiency. I get questions, how often do you generally need to fertilize a tree? And it'll vary depending on the quality of the soil. And usually I think what you'll find is it's probably not something that needs to be done every single year. I think a lot of times it's something that maybe needs to be done every 3 to 5 years. And again, that will depend on the quality and the level of fertility in the soil in which the tree is growing. I would now like to spend a few minutes talking about insect control with microinjection. I would like to start off by talking about a brand new product that we have. The product is Dinocide. Dinoteffuron is the active ingredient in Dinocide. Dinocide comes available in a 2 ml, a 3 ml, and a 4 ml capsule. It also comes available in a liquid loadable bottle. Dinocide has a caution signal word on the label, and it is a very broad spectrum insecticide. It is systemic in control, and it'll give you season-long control. Dinoside is translaminar. The dinoside active ingredient can pass from the tree's xylem to its phloem. And what that means to the tree is that it is effective on a wider range of insect pests, because dinoside will control the insects that are feeding both on the xylem and the phloem of the tree. This is a partial list of some of the insects that you can expect to control with dinoside. And you've noticed that I did underline the scale, both armored and soft shell. And the reason for that is that one of the reasons that we added dinoside to our product line is because we know that it is a very effective scale material. The next product I would like to mention is insecticide B. Bidrin, or dicrotophos, is the active ingredient in insecticide B. It is a danger, poison, class 1 pesticide. It is a toxic organophosphate chemistry. We actually put a red top on the capsule of insecticide B, and that is to serve as a reminder that this is a potentially hazardous product and must be handled with great caution. Insecticide B provides very broad spectrum systemic insect control. It gives a very quick knockdown, oftentimes within minutes of application. And insecticide B does have a fairly short residual compared to other injected products. It will last for approximately 30 to 60 days in the tree. This is a partial list of some of the insects you can expect to control with insecticide B. There are very few insects feeding in or on a tree treated with insecticide B that will survive. This is an example of a customer that used insecticide B. He got a phone call from the Mentor Harbor Yacht Club. They had 14 honey locust trees that were getting hit pretty heavily with a plant bug infestation. He went out to inspect the site and he realized that he was about 15 feet away from Lake Erie and he was about 4 feet away from a parking lot with cars. And being so close to the water, he probably had a wind from sunup to sundown, so a foliar application was just not an option. So he talked to his chemical supplier that suggested he use insecticide B on those trees, which he did. His supplier suggested that he lay a poster board under the first tree that he treated, and just to see what would happen. Well, he did that, and when he was finishing up on the last tree, approximately a half of an hour later, he noticed that there were already plant bugs dropping dead out of that tree in about a half an hour. Insecticide B gives us a very, very quick knockdown of insects. That is a very unique property of that particular product. The next product I'd like to talk about is imicide. Imidacloprid is the active ingredient in imicide. Imicide comes available in a 2 ml, a 3 ml, and 4 ml capsules. It also comes available in the liquid loadable bottle. Imicide carries a caution label. It too is a very broad spectrum insecticide. It gives us systemic control, and imicide will give us season-long residual. Imicide is a chemical that has been used extensively in the Asian longhorn beetle program in Chicago, Cincinnati, and up in the Northeast. This is a partial list of some of the insects you can expect to control with imicide. And you notice I have underlined emerald ash borer. Imicide works very effectively on the emerald ash borer. Sometimes when I talk about the insects that imicide controls, it's easier to tell it what it does not control. And imicide does really not have very effective control on mites, and it doesn't have very effective control on Lepidoptera, or your worm, caterpillar type insects. Most other insects it's quite effective on. I also like to point out that not only with imicide, but with all the Mauget products, the insecticide is in the tree. And when you're dealing with tree insects that are also inside the tree, like the bronze birch borer, the birch leaf miner, emerald ash borer, and many other insects, that is the best way to control them, is because the insecticide is inside the tree where they are. Next, I'd like to talk about Abicide 2. Abamectin is the active ingredient in Abicide 2. Abicide 2 carries a warning label. It is available in 2 ml, 3 ml, and 4 ml capsules. It is also available in the liquid loadable bottle. Now, Herbicide 2 is effective on mites, and Herbicide 2 is effective on Lepidoptera, that is your caterpillar worm type insects. And Herbicide 2 does give us season-long residual. This is a partial list of some of the insects you could expect to control with Herbicide 2, and you note that mites and Lepidoptera are on that list. I would like to point out that Mauget products are well suited to use in environmentally sensitive areas. I had a client that got a call from SeaWorld of Ohio. At their Eagle Point exhibit, they had European alders that had a leaf miner infestation. Now, this is an amusement park, and this is an exhibit that involves eagles. So obviously they were very, very concerned about using something that would be effective that wouldn't cause any problems. The applicator actually treated these alder trees with an injection of Herbicide 2. He was able to eradicate the insect problem. It wasn't necessary to shut the exhibit down. It wasn't necessary to relocate the eagles, and they were able to go into the property, discreetly provide their service with a minimal problem. Mauget has 4 different insecticides now, and I get the question from time to time, you know, there's a lot of overlap with your insecticides. Where do they fit in an insect management program? And I put together this little spreadsheet that kind of helps explain that a little bit. Insecticide B gives very broad spectrum insect control. The longevity of control is only about 30 to 60 days, and it gives a very, very quick knockdown of insects. Insecticide B fits best in a curative insecticide program. Emicide offers us very broad spectrum insect control. Emicide does not control the Lepidoptera or mites. With Emicide, you can expect to get insect knockdown in about 7 days, and it will provide season-long control 4 months. So Emicide fits very well in a preventative insecticide program. Herbicide 2, it's a broad-spectrum insecticide. Herbicide 2 does give us very effective control on both Lepidoptera and mites. It'll give us about 7-day knockdown following injection, and it too will give us season-long control about 3 to 4 months. So Herbicide 2 fits well as a preventative option. Dinocide, it is a broad-spectrum insecticide. It gives us very good control of scale insects. Dinocide is also not particularly effective on Lepidoptera or mites. Dinocide will give us 3-day knockdown following injection. It'll give us season-long control, about 3 months worth of control. So Dinocide can fit well in a preventative or an early curative insecticide program. I would now like to spend a few minutes talking about disease control with microinjection. The first product I'd like to mention is our product Arborists. Arborists is a phosphite-based fungicide. Arborists may be used on ornamental, forest, nut, and fruit trees. Arborists is the only fungicide product we have that's labeled to be used on trees where you're going to consume the fruit or the nuts or the maple syrup that year. So if you have a client that has an apple tree, for example, and he says, I want to eat the fruit this fall, it can legally be treated with Arborists. Arborists comes in a 5 and a 7.5 ml capsule. It also comes available in a liquid loadable bottle. This is a list of some of the diseases you can expect to control with Arborists: Phytophthora, which are your root rot diseases, anthracnose and apple scab. Our next fungicide is Fungisol. Debicarb is the active ingredient, and Fungisol carries a caution label. It is a broad-spectrum systemic fungicide, and it prevents the infection of many vascular and canker diseases. And this is a partial list of some of the diseases you can expect to control with Fungisol. These are true sycamore trees that were treated. These trees are actually right across the street from each other. On the left, this tree was not treated, and you'll note that it has lost approximately half of its leaves due to anthracnose. The tree in the right-hand side was treated with Fungisol early in the spring, and you can see that it hasn't lost hardly any of its leaves due to anthracnose. Tebujet 16. Tebuconazole is the active ingredient. It carries a caution label. It comes available in a 4 and a 6 ml capsule. Tebujet 16 also comes available in liquid loadable bottles. And you use Tebujet 16 for the seasonal suppression of many diseases. And this is a partial list of some of the diseases you can expect to control with Tebujet 16. The next product I'd like to talk about is Microjet Ultra. Oxytetracycline hydrochloride complex is the active ingredient in Microjet Ultra. Microjet Ultra carries a caution label, and we use Microjet Ultra for the suppression of bacterial diseases. So Microjet Ultra is actually an antibiotic. It is not a fungicide. One thing that I really do need to comment on Microjet Ultra, that it does have a limited shelf life. It is the only product in the Mauget product line that does have a limited shelf life. We recommend that you use up all your Microjet the year that you buy it, and that you not carry it over from one year to the next. So we recommend that you order your specific quantity needs, and if you do have refrigeration, it will extend the shelf life of Microjet Ultra. This is a list of some of the diseases you can expect to control with Microjet Ultra, and you'll note that I have underlined oak, bacterial leaf scorch, and pear, fire blight. Those two diseases seem to be the most frequently used Microjet Ultra diseases. Combination products. We do make two products where we have both the fungicide and the insecticide in the same capsule. With Abasol, it is a combination of Abicide and Fungisol. Imisol is a combination of Imicide and Fungisol. Sometimes your clients have trees that have both an insect and a disease problem, and with these two products you can clean up both the insect and the disease with one application. Microinjection is a logical choice for environmentally sensitive areas. And I think you'll find that a lot of Mauget products are used in areas like schools and universities, parks and playgrounds, street trees, zoos, amusement parks, near water, and other places that you would consider to be environmentally sensitive. Thank you for your attention. That concludes our Mauget presentation.